Hello, everyone who joined. Welcome. We're starting in about 5 minutes. So feel free to use the chat to ask questions as we go along. We'll be reviewing those questions at the end. Thank you. Okay, everyone, let's start this over. First of all, thank you so much for joining. Let me open up my camera and help introduce everyone too. So if you're not seeing the screen where it says retail at scale of servers with AWS, please let us know on the chat or feel free to ask the questions on the panel on the right as well. As a reminder, we will be answering those questions at the very end. And first of all, I just want to introduce everyone here. You should be able to see everyone's on camera. So the first one is Tom and David from Dunelm. You can see him at the bottom of the screen, I suppose. And we also have Ron from Epsagon, CTO of Epsagon, on the top right corner. Perfect. So yeah, and by the way, again, thanks Tom and David for joining us today. I know there's a lot that you can share and a lot of questions. I myself, I'm trying to remove questions so I don't ask the questions only. So if you're for you attendee, please make sure you write those questions. Ron and I will be reviewing and asking them directly. Now, before we start, I just want to set the scene real quick into what serverless actually means to us before Dunelm can explain their story, why they chose serverless and everything. When we say serverless, especially when you talk to customers or people on social media, they might mean different things. To AWS, think of it as a spectrum. The further you are from the left, the more you have to manage. So as you move to the right-hand side, you start using more managed services, including serverless compute like Lambda or Fargate for containers, or even databases like Aurora or DynamoDB. It doesn't mean that you're always going to be everything to 100% on the right, but it also means that sometimes you're going to be using some of the compute being serverless, databases sometimes being in the middle or being more traditional, or you might be using cloud native messaging capabilities like streams like Kinesis or SNS and SQS. Now that this is out of the way, I just want to hand over to Tom and Dave to give you a quick intro into what Dunelm is and why they actually taken that journey. Over to you, Tom.
Hi guys. Yeah, so Dunelm is a homewares company. We sell basically everything to do inside the home. That could be from furniture to bedding to lights to whiskey glasses, so all that kind of stuff. We're currently the market leader in the UK, and yeah, we have 174 shops across the UK, and we've just relaunched our website / our e-commerce platform. Cool. So before we had serverless, we were basically a typical e-commerce. We had a typical e-commerce system, basically bought off the shelf in a private cloud, which wasn't AWS. It was your typical servers where we had to patch, had to maintain, had to back up, had to look after. They were like our pets. One of the main issues we had maintaining that platform is that it was quite old. It would fall over quite a lot. It had lots of infrastructure around it, lots of hardware around it, and yeah, it was very challenging to keep to maintain. One of the key things that took a long time to do was basically delivering new software or new releases to our customers. In the last 18 months or so, before we launched the new platform, we did about 14 releases. Each of those releases would take about 2 weeks to do, it would take about over 12 people to release, and would sometimes fail, and we'd have a really bad rollback plan. Also, which was quite painful, the website is basically so slow for our customers. Some of the lazy loading of some of the PLP or the product description pages where we sell our stuff was very slow. Just scrolling down the page, for instance, you'd see a lot of lag, a lot of slowness, and we'd get customer complaints and bad feedback. And generally speaking, the customer experience was very bad. What's more, we also had, we've got a customer contact center which deals with customer returns, complaints, recommendations, and so forth. And that system that they use in the customer contact center is heavily coupled with the e-commerce platform of old. So for instance, if the database backend would go down, not just the website would go down, but the customer contact center would go down. So we'd have, numerous amounts of major incidents happening at the same time. So that was very bad. So we realized about 2 years ago, 18 months ago, that we needed to move away from this and we needed to rebuild. So we basically decided to rebuild everything using serverless. Cool. But before we did that, we basically, the teams and the teams and bigger teams were basically quite misaligned to business outcomes. So we looked at the Spotify model and saw how they did it, and we aligned pretty much our IT transformation of what Spotify had done. So we basically had 2 pizza box size squads, so around about 8 developers, 1 PO per squad, 1 product owner, 1 delivery manager / agile scrum master. And we heavily productized these squads to align with business outcomes. So for instance, we have a basket squad, which looks after the basket microservice on the new platform. So going for this transformation, it helped us work between the 2 locations, because not only were the squads could manage themselves a lot better than before, but it also enabled the business to share knowledge and experiences together. Cool. So we basically had it directed down to us to say from our director of engineering to say let's go serverless full on. So we make that decision about 18 months ago. One of the things we found that was quite difficult was there was a steep learning curve, learning SAM, CLI, learning cloud formation, how to basically deploy quickly, etc., etc. One of the things we found to begin with, and I think AWS can definitely agree with this, is that some of the documentation around serverless was quite weak at the time. Now it's a lot more improved, and there's a lot of ease of entry into serverless. We also had problems with learning about best practices for an API gateway and lambdas, execution time, etc. We also had a problem of hitting certain limits, which we didn't really know about because we just started using it, like SNS limits, SQS limits, the amount of S3 buckets you can create, etc. But we also had a really, really big problem of how to actually understand where we had problems and failure and bottlenecks within serverless. In particular, when our lambdas would basically fail, or the code that we were putting into lambdas would fail. So yeah, that was one of our biggest problems. Cool. So about a year ago, we spoke with Hator, and we went out to market and we looked at different products, and we really needed something to give us more visibility into how and understand where we'd have potential issues within our serverless footprint. Obviously within EC2 or ECS, you could just look at the log files that are basically put into var log, and that's a lot easier to potentially do. But you don't necessarily have that ability within serverless. So we enabled Epsagon, and we went on a journey with them, and they helped us to understand where we've basically got problems within our serverless stack. So moving forward a little bit to where we are now, in August of this year, we did about 150 releases to production, as opposed to the 14 or 15 we did in the last 18 months. We find fixing forwarders a lot easier because we can see where problems are, because we can identify them a lot quicker. Some of the outcomes of that is response time to our on our website is a lot faster, basically loads a lot quicker, pretty much all over the place. We are serving our customers. We're serving more customers, more customers more than ever. A lot of our customers we're seeing are returning. Conversion has gone up by like a % or 2. And generally speaking, the feedback we've got from the e-commerce platform is the customers are generally happy, which is obviously what we're here for.
Okay, so this is a high-level overview of how our products come from PIM, which is our product information management. This is essentially a enrichment tool that the business use. Before, it would take at least over 24 hours for a product to get on the site, but now it can be done within a matter of minutes as we moved over into the AWS architecture. So just give you a quick run through of this. Products come from the PIM over in the left. They'll go into a queue, and we're using DynamoDB for housing all of our products. From there, we're using a trigger that pushes out to a notification service, and this is great because it allows us to fan out how product information is then distributed to other services, such as our feeds, which go up to Google and so forth, and then pushing it out to our business intelligence team that are using this to create a data lake, so they can then use machine learning algorithms and so forth to help out with forecasting for future products and so forth. We're also then able to push out to Algolia, which is our search engine, and then from there we have the API gateway, and in front of that we have the CDN, which essentially just drives the site search. Cool, next slide. And this is our OMS stack. From here you can see that we've got SAP, which holds all of our product stock information. It's a bit of a behemoth system. From here, we have an API gateway again, where we can see it fanning out from the SNS into many queuing systems from here. I'm not going to go through and explain each one, but each one of those queues uses a DL queue. And this is where we can, if any of those queues fails, they can then sit inside that DL queue and then redrive that process. From there, there's lambdas that are used, and they'll move into the RDS for MySQL. Over on the right-hand side, we have a notification for the acknowledgements. This is a separate API gateway that then feeds stock back into the availability stock and pricing service from there. And then this is then coupled into pushing updates back into SAP and Salesforce below.
I was trying to remember one piece that happened here. When most enterprises usually start trying to migrate something, they usually will try to enhance on something they have, or they would also have to use a new, and it could be a greenfield applications or anything. What I found interesting about Dunelm on this, especially the whole team in Leicester as well doing some of this, is that you guys used SAP to publish the message to an API gateway. Initially, you had a bunch of SNS topics that would essentially fan out to multiple SQS queues. And then back in the days, you discovered that you could use message filtering. So in this case, you're pushing to a single SNS topic, if my memory serves, and that goes to hundreds of queues. I can't even imagine how many queues there are. Back in the days, were about 200 or so. And then those functions would call to an existing MySQL server that you're using RDS, including some of those containers already using ECS. What's even more interesting is at the very early days, you've also taken the decision of using DL queues, whether some of those messages would fail to be processed. And you also, when doing load testing, you also implemented, which is not shown in this picture, you've implemented a way to redrive those messages from DL queue back to the original queue, so it could be reprocessed once again. So in case I haven't missed anything, I would just go straight to the questions, but Dave, correct me if I'm wrong if I missed anything on some of those sayings, but I think that's where my memory is.
Yeah, you're right. So one of the big things for the messaging side was we did have problems where those messages were failed, and actually creating that redrive pattern so we could replay those messages back via whether it would be OPSU, which is our operational support tribe, or ourselves was key. That pattern became really useful going forward, and we've had to do it one or two times, but yeah, it's really useful having that redrive pattern, especially around queues.
Fantastic. Okay, well, with that, let's actually start our Q&A. For you who just joined, from here on, it's pretty much going to be all about questions that you have. And Ron and I also have a bunch of questions ourselves. So feel free to use the panel on the right-hand side. If you downloaded the client, there should be a button where you can ask questions yourself. We will be taking those questions and asking one at a time. If I could ask, the first one is, many enterprises who are looking to do serverless, they usually come up with two questions at first. What exactly should I pick up first? And do I have to change my team structure and the way I'm currently developing, or should I do any investments into the DevOps or tribes and squads? To you, Tone and Dave, what kind of made you make that decision of changing to the Spotify model of tribes and squads very early on before you embarked into the serverless piece?
So from my point of view, I think it's very good to get aligned with what the business outcomes about what you want to do. And I think that that enabled us to begin with. It's also the right size of teams. It's a very good size. We obviously heavily Agile as well. We use Scrum, which pretty much a lot of businesses do as well, and that helped us to basically define the outcomes quite quickly. In terms of, from my point of view, I was DevOps manager then. One of the challenges we had was obviously making pipelines or releasing software continuously to the various environments really quickly and safely and automatically. So one of the things we did was loosely couple a DevOps engineer with each of the squads. We did have a kind of a capacity issue at the time because we had quite a small team. We had to expand quite quickly. But as soon as we did that, we basically sped up the delivery of all the squads across the whole business after a couple of months. There was quite a bit of learning curve and things like that, but that really did help us.
Okay. Ron, do you have some questions? Because otherwise I'm going to ask already about programming languages, if they love Node.js, that sort of thing, but I will leave that for later.
Yeah, actually, I do have a question. So when you started, you had a plan that in a year you're going fully serverless. That's obviously requires both of planning, like lots of planning, both in the operational side and the engineering side. So actually, one for each of you, for Tom, like, how do you decide which tools are you gonna use and what are you gonna do on the day-to-day? And for you, Dave, like, you're gonna use tons of different new resources on top of AWS. How do you start to architect such a solution?
Okay, cool. So I'll try and answer the first one. So tooling, we went pretty much with SAM CLI. That was pretty much on Hayton's recommendation. So that was one. So
but
yeah,
what would you do today if you're, some DevOps person or a principal person at a company and you want to start promote serverless within the company and you need to start choose tooling for your future application?
Yeah, so I think you should definitely obviously provide, choose a good login and monitoring provider off the offset. But I think now, one of the problems we had was basically getting people up to speed, or developers up to speed, or even engineers up to speed. Now we've got that knowledge, and I think we're actually feeding back to AWS and their roadmap as well about where we want things to be in the future. But in terms of tooling and stuff like that, we went, down the sort of ELK route for monitoring and logging and things like that. We also looked at various different ways of delivering our pipelines, but we went with, say, Jenkins to begin with because we knew that. So that was easier for us. We had to heavily customize Jenkins to get us to a place that was working quite well. In hindsight, if we'd have had maybe a different skill set, we might have chosen a different SaaS provider to do that tooling to help us deliver that kind of stuff, deliver our working software. But everything is always hindsight is 20/20, isn't it? So there was a steep learning curve of everything, like there was any tool or any new sort of leading edge service. But now, where we are now, we're 2 weeks into our new platform. I don't have to worry about patching stuff anymore. I don't have to worry about getting developers or getting quick software out to our customers. We've got the pipelines. I think there's a new stat that's just come out. We're into our 200s now of delivering working software in the last 4 weeks. So that's just a testament of all the hard work all the engineers have done, and the massive reliance we now have on serverless, which has been awesome.
And for you, David, you start with a new architecture, new resources, new services. Where do you even start planning such a big system?
I think it's a case of you need to break that down into smaller components if you can. Just starting on those simple workflows and understanding how that data is going to be moving around your system. Start small, and then you can easily iterate on that with the AWS services. I mean, when we started, one of the first ones that went into production was the product service. First iteration was create that Lambda. Can I write to DynamoDB? And then great, okay, cool. Can I add on to that? As we were using SAM Local, we were able to just keep building on those services, and if we needed to change or pivot on direction, again, it was pretty straightforward to do. Sure, at the very beginning it was a steep learning curve, but I think we're fairly experienced now, and we know what we're doing. So as we go forward, we're able to architect those a little bit easier. going forward.
Yeah, if I could add to that question as well. When we started this, back when Tonino was in place and a bunch of other folks at Dunelm, one thing that we did, which I think it was quite interesting for pretty much both of us, was we held some Q&A sessions at the beginning of kind of having to understand what are the tools that you know, what are the pieces that you already feel comfortable, so we can try to see whether those would match the serverless ecosystem, or some of those would actually have to be replaced by other tools like SAM CLI or Service Framework, whatever that means. And then from there, we had multiple of those sessions to also help training some of the Dunelm staff as well, because different from other companies, Dunelm wasn't actually using about 8 people or 15 people trying to develop the application at first. They actually went with like lots and lots of engineers at once. And that actually had a different thing as well, because if I'm not mistaken, correct me if I'm wrong, development was actually occurring in 2 locations at the same time. So it wasn't that everyone was centralized in London, everyone knew what was going on, but they were actually going in a very rapid pace, and having those squads actually helped a lot too, especially on the engineering mindset.
Yeah, we have over 60 developers worked on this project, and yeah, that's quite a lot of people to organize, but everyone was pretty keen to, just jump on board and push on through with it.
Okay, and just to kind of break the ice on some of the people asking the questions as well, is what is the program language that you're using for because correct me if I'm wrong again, but you have like hundreds, if not over 1,000, last time I count, of Lambda functions already. So what programming language you use, what are the tools that you're using today? And what kind of made it easier? What was the decision of choosing that one?
So we're using TypeScript, and we're compiling this through Webpack, using SAM local for development locally, which helps quite a lot. We made that decision. Majority of the teams were more PHP based, and we wanted to move away from that and get more of a strict typing language. There is, in the data science team, they are using Python. They do have some issues with, haters loving this, but there is some issues around package sizing and so forth, but they are looking at using TypeScript for the future, and that's going to be the same. So it's a standard that's our target architecture. It's a standard through all of the tribes. So one member is able to go to another and help out there and so forth, and keep not allowing tribes to use their own language. Otherwise, it becomes a bit of a hodgepodge of all different languages, and it also gives DevOps a little bit of an easier time, because you don't have to create a new delivery pipeline. There's one way of doing things, and that decision was taken amongst all of the tribes themselves to be using TypeScript.
Okay.
Another question that we got, so they're asking, as a platform team, as a platform manager in the team, how do you suggest to the teams to work on their tools and the best practices? Because each team is independent and should work solely and move forward, but there are some guidelines and standardization that you're trying to apply between all of the teams, especially when there are 2 sides. So where is the line between giving them the freedom and deciding which practices everyone should be enforced with?
Yeah, that's a good question, and one we battle with or have challenges with every day. But essentially, we've templated a lot of our pipelines up, and it's pretty much up to the principal engineers and the previous digital architects to help with the architecture decisions. But it was very much a case of trying things, see if it works, and obviously failing fast, and that kind of pattern. But yeah, so we built a bunch of pipelines, and we basically templated them, cookie cut them, and gave them each of the squads a lot of help with a DevOps, at least a couple of DevOps engineer with that squad to help them build their pipeline, which will be specific to the product that they're trying to create. Some of them were very easy, just a couple of Lambdas and a DynamoDB or an API gateway in front or whatever. Others, like the OMS one, the order management system that you just saw previously, was quite complicated. I think is even more complicated now. But we're in a place now where we want to give the squads the ability to self-serve. So, for instance, one of the things we've got is we also, I think everyone on this call probably uses Slack to some degree. We use Slack a lot. I seem to spend most of my life in Slack. And same for the developers. We've actually got a bot in Slack now called DunBot, D-U-N for obviously short for Dunelm. And as that bot is written, actually, HTML like this, put on in Python. So from that bot, for instance, we can make changes to SSM. We can make changes to people can. I actually don't know all the things it can do now. It can do so much stuff. It actually talks back to people if they ask, "Where's the milk?" or something like that. But it's given the ability to the squads to basically run commands against some of the lower environments and some of the higher environments too, to get parameters out of parameter store, to check details, or to do a PR request or whatever it is within AWS. But it is definitely a balancing act between giving the squads and the teams all the freedom as much as possible, but also having a place that they can put their product in a safe, secure, automated way. I hope that answers the question.
Yeah.
And if I could pick back on that one, because Dunelm has changed the engineering mindset like a lot compared to what it was before. One of the events that I loved attending once was, I think it was happening on a Friday. Dave and a bunch of other people in London were sharing some of the learnings that you got from the platform, some of the cool pieces that you've done. I remember you were sharing not only some cool things that you've done with performance in Algolia, but also some of the operations piece. Is that something that still happened? And more importantly, if I were an enterprise today trying to start, what advice would you give?
Yeah, so you're talking about the tech highlights. This happens once a month, and it's completely open floor for any of the developers. It did start with the tech lead doing a lot of presenting, but it's generally there because between the tribes there is communication, but someone might be, or a swarm might be working on something that none of the other tribes know about. So it gives them a chance to stand up and talk about what they're doing, and everyone's quite passionate about it. And it's a great way of putting comms out into the team instead of like reading documentation or sharing learnings. Some of the things have been around TDD processes. One of the talks was also about the pull requests, how they're handled, and the way that one tribe was doing it. And when they spoke about it, everyone jumped on board and was like, actually, that's a really good way of handling things. There's also some things with regards to logging and monitoring and so forth that was introduced in the tech highlights, proof of concepts and so forth. So just ideas. Sofa Finder, that was another one that was done. So yeah, and then core engineering were also doing their demonstrations as well, which was it's a good way. It's a good way of putting comms out, not only just to the technical, but anyone was invited to this meeting, so business stakeholders could come and see what was being done within the tribes.
Mm-hmm. Another thing for you, I think, Dave or Tom, if you're responsible for that. So how do you version between Lambda functions and multiple Lambda functions? Because I guess that one feature can be applied at multiple Lambda functions at once. So how do you maintain versioning over these things?
So at the moment, this is being handled via feature toggles. And we are looking at Canary releases as well. On the front end side, that's a little bit more of an issue because we're running a CDN in there, but on the back end systems, that's a lot easier to handle. As you have more traffic, it can slowly creep up. So yeah, look at Canary releases for that side. Some of our stacks are also still on blue-green as well.
Yeah, so it's going a bit there.
Yeah, I would love to have another question that is involved around the engineering and the deployment. So CI/CD wise, some people really ask us and they want to understand how do you maintain your CI/CD pipeline from development to production, specifying like specifically on, is there a dev environment for each and every developer or for each and every team, and when it's being pushed to production and how? So if you can elaborate on these topics.
Yeah, so we have to heavily align with our upstream, which is SAP. So we have dev, QA, sort of staging or pre-prod and then production. Pretty much every deployment goes through that sort of gated process to some extent, up to pre-prod at least. And yeah, so all the testing goes down obviously in the lower environments. We give we've separated that by AWS accounts, and that helped us a lot to begin with. I think we'd probably move away from that in the future because we do see for instance, you are coupled with all the squads that are coupled together with a dev account, so you can run into say the soft limits as I spoke about before. But essentially, each squad is in control and serves. Runs their own pipeline with our help, and they run their own testing, unit testing, etc. And they got to the point now where they needed to be helped a lot to begin with in terms of the management, the data management of that. To now they're pretty much all self-sufficient, and we kind of just let them get on with it. We've created the best template. Sometimes it breaks, like any pipeline does, and we have to go in there and help them. But pretty much they're self-serving in this respect now, and we don't actually know. In some of the stuff that some of the development teams are doing is actually really sort of amazing.
Cool.
I would like to point out one thing that if nobody asks, I will ask, is most of the time when you're doing microservices, most people will end up with multiple repos. But some of the teams I know at Dunelm, you guys use monorepo. If you were part of that discussion, or even on your day-to-day, if you interact with that, what is your experience in dealing with monorepos, especially on doing with serverless and the pipelines and at the scale that you operate?
Dave, you want to answer this one?
That's a good question.
Yeah,
that's a really good question. It has its moments. There's the benefits of having something like that is from a testing point of view is that it can be you can easily deploy a single end-to-end test, and creating a test suite for that area is very important. Downsides, yeah, there's a few in there. Working with it, I think we could definitely improve on that from a deployment pipeline for the future. It's something that we're looking into. I hope that answers your question. It probably doesn't.
I can also chime in. We also develop on serverless, and we had a big debate whether we should go monorepo or like multiple repositories for each service. Ultimately, we ended up with monorepo. I think that the downsides for us is clear. Build time is longer, and you can get involved with each one's collisions in the code. To that, I will add that the main benefits for us is moving faster, and when you start to do serverless, or you start to break down your application into sets of microservices, they need to communicate with one another. It is much more easier to do that when all the code is in the same repo, and when you submit it for a PR or staging test, all services are aligned together and not in a different repositories that needed to be orchestrated. So for us, it's a matter of moving fast. I don't think that it can scale up forever, but it's definitely helps you grow much faster at the first steps.
Yeah, the only mono repo that we have is our front end architecture. So that's React. The Lambdas are all of those individual services that we've been through. They're all separated out. So product service will deploy on its own stack. OMS does have a few individual stacks, but they can all be deployed separately as well. So yeah, there's definitely the good and bad, and we've experienced it as well. From the front end side, there's a bit of a crossover between one or two tribes when they're deploying, and there's definitely a clash there sometimes, especially around the end-to-end testing. As it goes through the pipeline, it just stops it dead, and then there's a bit of investigation and digging to figure out what's going on. So
yeah, I got something else from the people asking about Coldstarts. So actually, it's even for you, Heitor. I think it's everyone is really love to talk about like Coldstarts and what should they do. And so as a guru, what would you suggest everyone that is afraid of that term Coldstarts?
Sure, and I think actually that was the first question when we started working together at Dunelm. Everyone was like, I'm using Java or Scala. What do you think about Costars? Like, oh, okay. So let's have that convo first. I think before you answer that question, it's important to understand who's asking the question, where they're coming from. If they're coming from a container background where you can reasonably spin up a container quite quickly, you get to the discussions of what if you have no box, no EC2, no virtual machine, and if you were to start again, how long would that take? And when it comes from serverless, especially Lambda functions, because the compute is ephemeral, you've got to think differently. In a server base where you have, let's say, Java, Spring, or any other framework where you try to optimize for the long run, for a long process, it's a very different way for Lambda, where sometimes you may have a container, a execution environment running, but next time we invoke, maybe we need to spin up that again. So if you have to pay the penalty of doing something very heavy processing at the start, yes, Coldstar will definitely be a problem for you, and you have to optimize for that purposes. And it is exactly the same way when, especially coming from languages that are strongly typed, Java, .NET, or many others, where you have a lot of dependency injection and reflection. All of those are very heavy at start. So sometimes what a normal Java function that might spin up in, let's say, milliseconds may take seconds in this case. So it's a more of a conversation to have and try to understand how taxing it actually is to start your code. After that, it's pretty much a no-brainer. I can't share a picture right now, but I'm happy to share on social media or email me if you like. We've done a project on Twitch called Serverless Airline, and we use both TypeScript and Python. Even if they are dynamic languages, they also have a start time of hundreds of milliseconds. When we run the load test, a costar for Python was generally 700 milliseconds with all the libraries tracing, logging, everything. After that was roughly 40 milliseconds to execute something to Dynamo come back and forth. So when you compare those pieces on a P99, when you have constant traffic, that's actually very unnoticeable. It's not something that would impact the business. But if you're in dev, especially if you're going to the console and clicking test that function, make a change and test again, yes, that will be something that you will take notice.
Yeah. Anything specifically that you implemented, David or Tom, for Coldstarts, or you just move forward with that?
The only thing that we implemented for Coldstarts was more having an overview that it was actually happening. I think from our side, that was really important. And once we noticed that, we'd start doing a little bit more digging in there. And if your Lambda's doing it, as already been said, if your Lambda's doing a lot of heavy lifting, then yeah, you're gonna see some cold start issues there. The only ones that we have cold starts are more around those ECS containers for that. I haven't seen anything for for a while once we started optimizing our lambdas, and that's something that we're monitoring all the time as well. Memory usage.
Yeah, again, the tooling Epsagon provides definitely helps with that, getting a visibility of that stuff. But yeah, as David said, we just to just be completely visible, we do have most 80 or 90% of the new platform is obviously in serverless. We do have 10%, 15% or something around about that. That's in PHP and ECS still. Most of our problems that we have at the moment are probably in that area. Some of that is we have perpetuated some of that development as well, because we needed to keep some of those services running for a longer period than we anticipated. But as David just said, the Coldstarts, the deployment issues are mainly around that area now as opposed to serverless. So yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I have another question. I have one question, especially for the core engineering, because not many other people understand what that is. And especially on an enterprise level, that's actually a key thing to have. And more importantly, as part of the core engineering, or even as managers or head of the platform, how do you train new staff? Did you also have to change the way you hire people because they have a different stack? Your mindset has changed completely if you were comparing Dunelm 3 years ago, for instance.
Yeah, I mean, generally speaking, it's been hard to hire people that know about serverless for DevOps or core engineering. We're actually looking at hiring someone quite soon that has actually got experience in API gateway and stuff. And it's possibly the first candidate I've seen after looking at hundreds to pass my kind of desk. So that's quite nice to see that it is, more and more people are picking it up. But essentially what we'd do, we'd get people from either a sysadmin background or DevOps, loose DevOps background, and pretty much just train them up. And by that, we would pair them up with another DevOps engineer. We'd give them small tasks to begin with, put something in S3, make an event happen, trigger something, build your own small pipeline, your own kind of 20% day. It could be, for instance, the done bot was one of those things, even though it's not sort of, it is serverless, but it's not sort of typical deployment that we might do. So yes, we'd give engineers something that they enjoy doing, and then we'd couple them with a squad, and then they'd basically be kind of assimilated in that squad, I guess.
And just to finish on that one, Dave, and as part of the core engineering, how is your day-to-day? How do you see core engineering actually become a key enabler for the serverless transition as well?
Yeah, really important. As Tom pointed out, embedding DevOps into the tribe at the very beginning was really important. So you would have a dedicated person that you could talk to and resolve any issues with, and also making sure that we're doing things the right way as such, because if we let all of the tribes go off and do their own thing, you can end up being in a mess quite quickly. And just having that guidance from DevOps from an enterprise point of view, yeah, really important.
Let me be the one that asks the not so easy questions, but have you had anything that you've chosen that didn't work so well? I mean, any service or resource that you picked out for, like, engineering-wise for the job, but you understood that scaling-wise or something that it's not the best fit for what you thought it's going to be? And also, if that happened, what you learned from that for moving forward with choosing the right engineering resources? If you have any. I mean, yeah, if you choose
there was lots at the beginning. I think when you're going on that serverless journey, you're kind of feeling things out. So, but because of the way AWS is and the services that it provides, it allows you to pivot quite quickly. One of the key things I can't stress enough is make sure you've got decent logging. CloudWatch is great and everything, but yeah, you need to be able to deep dive into that, see where those bottlenecks are, because you don't get that overview, and Epsagon provide that for us, especially with some of the features that are in there. Timeline was quite useful as well. We have an aggregator, and that was we didn't know what was happening within that aggregator service, and yeah, you could trawl through CloudWatch and figure it out, but Epsagon gave you a timeline feature that was pretty useful, and it as soon as we saw it, it's like, that's where our problem is, and we could really start deep diving into that and fixing solutions. But yeah, there's plenty of those things that you're going to come across, and AWS just allows us to pivot really quickly.
Can you share a specific bottleneck, like a service that wasn't the best fit for your use or your need?
Yeah, I'm just trying to think off the top of my head. So yeah, because we had our old PHP legacy, I say legacy, tech debt as such. We had a stock service which was written in PHP, and this would handle all of the stock information. So the aggregator service would go out and talk to a rules engine and the stock service, and also another checkout service as well. And this particular, we thought we'd had a solution for this to put a queuing process in front of it, but it actually turned out that we were hammering the service itself, and it pulled it down. So once we found that out, we were able to essentially just rip that out and redeploy a new service and get it up and running again quite quickly.
Thanks.
Okay, so one piece that's also a common question for enterprises is trying to measure the impact of any technology decision. So now that you're live, how are you measuring some of those impacts? You mentioned the website is much faster than before, and you mentioned the number of deployments as well. Are there any stats or any advices that you would share how you're measuring this to help business stakeholders to make additional decisions, or also to inform the teams, hey, this is what we've done. This is exactly what the customer is actually experiencing after the decisions we've made.
Yeah, so we've put a lot of monitoring, obviously, around the platform. We're still catching up in that respect, to be completely honest. But from the business point of view, we also use Google Analytics quite a lot, and it's quite clear since we've gone live, for instance, that a typical busy day, we have a couple of those a week, is compared to, say, this time last year and this time a couple of weeks ago when we were on the old platform, is that generally speaking, we're making more money, the customers are happier. We can see that the site, there's definitely a few bottlenecks we're still working on. It's definitely not a perfect system. There is such a thing anyway, but there's definitely areas where we can improve. And some of our microservices are not as fast or as responsive as we would like. But in terms of, we're seeing, for instance, from a business point of view, or stakeholder point of view, customers that are returning more often, which is great. We haven't seen that before. We've seen conversion accelerate to the same level we had to it before we went live, and we're seeing it go up as well. Generally speaking, the feedback that we have on the site has been very, very positive. So just from that point of view, it's been really, really good. And we've also been doing, we're starting to do more, which was very, very difficult on the old system or the old platform, was to do load testing quite frequently because it would break the system. So that was obviously something we didn't want to do. But now we have the ability to load test frequently, more or less within a working day. So we're not doing it in the middle of the night when people aren't on their game. And we're also, doing all kinds of different things that we just wouldn't do normally. And Serverless gives us the ability to do that, so we can understand things like costs a lot better. We can know when we're less busy in the middle of the night. So yeah, it's definitely given us a great ability to sort of save money and also scale up sort of naturally as well, which we couldn't do before. Before we just had all the servers on all the time because switching them off would be too much of a problem, too difficult to do. Whereas now we don't have any of those problems. Hope that answers that one.
Yep, it does.
Another thing that we got, so when you got a function that is being triggered by an API gateway, what do you do with the 29 seconds limitation? And if you encounter that at all?
Oh, yeah, we've encountered that. I think everyone will at some point.
Yeah. So what's your strategy to avoid this one, or like, yeah?
Don't think anyone's ever came up with a perfect fit strategy. What we've tend to do, which is, this is going to sound like a bit of a hack, but we're actually probably capturing it before it times out. So if that process is gonna die, then we can capture that, and we can probably push it off to somewhere else and have a notification from there as well. Again, timeouts on API gateway, yeah, not ideal. There are workarounds for it, but yeah, if you've got something going over 29 seconds into an API gateway, then yeah, it's probably not the best fit for you, and you might want to look at another alternative. But yeah, capturing it before it times out is probably the better solution. Or thing there was talk about, yeah, anyway, okay.
Yeah, I definitely agree. For the person who asked this, so first of all, if you reach that 29 milliseconds that your API gateway is responding, so it's probably not the best fit. Probably something architectural wise should be a bit different, maybe more of an async way of handling stuff. And also being aware of it as it happens, it's a crucial thing to know, because if you're not even aware, your customers are being affected.
I mean, if it's just a pass through, then what you could do is just keep passing that message through, pass it on into, another data store, S3 or something, and then pull it from there, and then have another Lambda pull that, because then you've got another, I think it's 15 minutes, isn't it? Like max time on the Lambda. So if you have something that heavy that's running, then you could do that, and then you could even break it out from, if after you've stored it into S3, break it out into those smaller chunks if it's a big data load. But if it's processing wise, then yeah, I would probably go S3, then pull that message out and process it on another Lambda. I mean, there's plenty of ways to skin a cat with AWS. So yeah, don't want to sound bad, choose your poison on that one.
Yeah, and I think to that point is most customers who actually face that issue from the past few years of working with serverless, sometimes is mostly because that is a third-party integration that they don't control and it takes a while. It could be a system of records, or it could be something on premises that takes some time. So in those cases, if you cannot go async, think of a webhook or events or some sort of a callback mechanism. If you can do this, then in that particular case, well, it would be actually wise to use something like application load balancer, where you can have a much higher timeout and you can still invoke a Lambda to actually do whatever you need. But if that goes even further 29 seconds, further 15 minutes, then yeah, maybe it would be actually something else entirely, like Dave actually mentioned. All right, we're actually getting to a close, so about 5 minutes. Because this is also being recorded, is there anything else that you would like to share with people, especially on the enterprise space, or people who are specifically looking to learn serverless and trying that journey themselves as well?
Yeah, so from my point of view, as I said, I think we said a couple of times, it was a steep learning curve, but one that's definitely paid off in massive amount of dividends. As I said, we don't have to worry about all that other infrastructure stuff. We still also use EC2 for other stuff, where the use case fits. We still like containerization. We still use many of the different things that aren't serverless. But we think for the platform going forward, we want to be 100% serverless in the next 6 months or so. And the squads are working hard to basically get to that point. There's definitely issues with it, like any technology, but I think that the pros, the speed of delivery, the speed that we can get software out to our customers, the way that we can scale without having to think about it too much, and a bunch of other reasons that we've already mentioned. It's just, for us, it's made a lot of sense. The pain's definitely been worth it. We did it at scale. We had a lot of people, I say 60, 70 people that started this sort of journey with us. And there's a lot of interesting conversation about why we chose it, between the technicians and engineers and the developers, or debates, as you might want to call them. But I think, overall, we definitely went on a big journey, and it's taken us a lot of time to get to this place. But now we're sort of reaping the rewards, and there's definitely going to be issues in the future. But we're just going to face into them and fix forward. And with serverless, we can pretty much do that a lot easier than any other technology out there.
From my side, if it's your first time, start small, really small, and then it will just allow you to grow from there. Another big thing, make sure you've got some logging in place. It's really important, because coming from a lamp stack background, is relatively easy. You could just jump in there on the box and whatever. You haven't got that. So if you've got a way of logging and monitoring your lambdas and that architecture, yeah, that's probably, I would say, the most important part of hindsight's a wonderful thing. You can always go back and say, yeah, should have done this, should have done that. But yeah, I would have really gone with the login and monitoring. Make sure you've got that in place, and just start small, and then just grow from there.
I think these are the two greatest tips to anyone who's starting serverless. First of all, there is a lot to learn, and learn from others' experience. Don't try to reinvent the wheel, especially not on serverless, where everything is already there. And start small, move fast, iterate faster with your code. It's not like you're not obligated to any service or any resource. You can always try new things, so explore it.
Yeah, absolutely. And then to close, we have our Twitter handlers over there, and then everyone's also on LinkedIn. If you want to reach out to all of us, feel free to ask questions directly. And well, I would just also want to thank you, Tom and Dave, for actually taking the time with us today. I know it's been quite a heavy on questions than probably you anticipated. And thanks, Ron, as well, for helping organize all of this and help answering some of those pieces too. With that, thank you so much, everyone who joined. Thank you so much again. And feel free to reach out once again, and we're always there to help. Have a great day, and thank you, everyone. Goodbye.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye-bye.